his way up here, I'm going to ask that once breakfast is finished, because we have to turn the room around for the conference, if after the speaking and after your breakfast, if you would just please exit to the foyer. I believe there'll be coffee there anyway if you want to continue, but we need to get set up. Mike? Thank you.
So my little presentation this morning is basically covered off in those first 3 lines. We have one rule, we have 5 key pillars, and we have a 5-stage approach to any project that we want to have a successful outcome. Today we're going to be talking a little about an energy from waste project, but I believe this applies to any project that we undertake. We should always have our one rule, what I consider to be the preeminent rule in any project. There are 5 key pillars that underpin every project. And then we should have 5-stage approach to ensuring that we have the 5 pillars in play to sustain the project. Let's see if I can make this thing work. So our one rule, begin with the end in mind. In an energy from waste space, I believe that in Australia we have a white piece of paper and it's blank at this point in time. There's very little energy from waste being done. We have some bagasse, we have some gas from anaerobic digestion in the water treatment industry, we have the alternative fuel company in South Australia, we have a few other smaller projects, but pretty well we have a blank canvas in which to work to. So I think one of the things as a community, as an overall branch, we should be asking ourselves as we go down the track of energy from waste is, what is the big picture? What do we want to look like as waste management groups in 10 years' time in the energy from waste space? So that's the big picture. Let's have a think, because we're the leaders, we're the people that are going to be involved in energy from waste and how we develop energy from waste in our country and in our communities. So I firmly believe we should begin with the end in mind. What do we want it to look like? And that also goes at a macro level. So as we develop projects within our communities and as we work towards them, we should be having a little dream about what we believe is the end in mind. Now, the end in mind was a part of 7 Habits. Some of you are probably sitting there saying that's he stole that from Stephen J. Coveney, and I did. And I'm in the waste industry. I'm happy to own up to the fact that I stole it off Stephen J. But I thought I'd put the actual slide up of what Stephen J. was talking about when he said, begin with the end in mind. It's based on imagination, the ability to envision in your mind what you cannot at present see with your eyes. It is based on the principle that all things are created twice. There is a mental first creation and a physical second creation. The physical creation follows the mental, just as a building follows a blueprint. So as we start to believe and look, have a little dream about what we want waste to energy to look like as a big picture, some of that technology may not be present today, but it might not be too far away. And the reason why this is our one rule is I believe we should be very careful about what we implement today, that we don't stifle innovation of tomorrow. What do we want the big picture of waste to energy to look like? Again, that's the big picture. In a business level, when we start to put together facilities for managing the waste, and we have this lovely phrase, we want to divert it from landfill. Well, what does that really mean to us as a community? That we just want to divert it at all cost? I mean, we see stockpiles all over the joint of waste that are just stockpiled. That's diversion. It didn't go to landfill. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And what we create in the next few years, we're going to have for the next 30 years. So that is why I'm quite passionate about rule number 1, begin with the end in mind, at both the macro level, because we might go and spend $10 million building something today. We might spend 50 million or 100 million building something today that in 10 years is seen as a landfill the way we see landfills today, or it's not the direction we really wanted to go. So we just have to ask those questions. What do we want it to look like and how do we want it to be? Begin with the end in mind. Then, once we think, or we've had our little epiphany of what we believe is the end in mind, there are 5 key fundamental pillars that will underpin the project. And I think every single time we see a failed project, you could go back to these 5 pillars and recognise that one of them was missing, or one of them wasn't strong enough, one of them wasn't even considered, or whatever. But you can go back. Yesterday, after all of the 13 or 14 years since the swerve went belly up, we still had a slide on it yesterday. And if you go back and think about why that went belly up, you will come back to one of these 5 pillars. And I'll mention that, what I think that pillar was, when we get to it. So the 5 key pillars to a practical, technical and economically viable project. Pillar number 1. Now, they're not in any order. I just put number 1 on it because then I can talk to it as this is the first pillar, which is the host facility site. It's not, we don't go 1 through 5. They all interact with each other and they're all relative to what each of those pillars is. So if you're going to build a big incinerator, for example, you're probably not going to position it where you're going to put a smaller integrated resource recovery facility. So you've got to interact between the pillars, and hopefully we'll understand that a little bit as we go. Yesterday we heard a gentleman talking about he had a great site. He had what he considered a great technology, but the government infrastructure or the government's policy was stifling the growth of his business. So I question whether he chose the right site. I don't know, but maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Maybe there's more to that story. I don't want to judge either way. I just want to say that clearly he's having trouble getting that over the line in New South Wales. So maybe he chose the wrong site. So we need to be careful when we go, oh no, we've got a site, it'll work. But that site might be 100 yards away from neighbours that are going to say, we don't want that here. So you've got the wrong site. That site might be in a state where they don't have a policy that says, we're not going to let you build that plant here. So we have the wrong site. So there's a whole raft of questions need to be ascertained. Just because you have a block of land, you do not necessarily have a site. You just have a block of land at this stage. The next pillar is the resources and the feedstock. So you might think that you've got access to the 100,000 tonnes of feedstock that you need. You might do your homework and go, I reckon I can get that because I'm good and because I reckon I can undercut that business by $5 and I can still make $5 profit. But that business might be making $35 profit. They can just drop $15 and you're out the game again. So you need to be careful, or we need to be careful that we have the feedstock. We also need to be careful that we have the right feedstock. Years ago, I worked for a business, and the first thing I did was get rid of about 300,000 tonnes of feedstock that was just completely and utterly the wrong feedstock for that business. It just wasn't the feedstock, but it was feedstock. People were bringing it and paying their little gate fee, and everybody was excited they were getting all this stuff in. It just wasn't the material that could be processed in that facility. So the second pillar is making sure that we have the feedstock. We have continual supply of the feedstock. Again, we see around the world, and I've done a little bit of travelling, been fortunate enough to travel and see a little bit of this, where they've built a facility and it's had plenty of feedstock, and then other innovations come in and it's taken their feedstock away, and now they're hauling waste from all across Europe and different parts to top up some of these facilities. We're not quite so lucky in Australia. You know, some of those cities have got 22 million people living in them. We've got an entire country nearly the size of the United States with 24 million as of 2 days ago. So we can't just go, oh, that's all right, we'll just ship it in from somewhere, because it might not be there to ship in. So our second pillar in our project is, let's make sure we have A, enough feedstock, B, a feedstock we can get, and C, a feedstock that's suitable for the application we want to put it to. Then we have technology. So once again, going back the other way, you might have a feedstock and choose the wrong technology. The technology you choose may not be suitable for the feedstock you have. So I hope you're starting to see how the pillars interact. And then the technology might not be suitable for the facility host site. And sometimes we see where we heard one yesterday, I've touched on it. Guy has what he considers to be a great product. He's a great piece of technology. He's able to do what he says he's able to do, and we have to take that on face value. We have to take on face value that he has the ability to make sure that all his emissions come in well under whatever those emissions criteria are that he has to do. But he's in the wrong site, because that state won't allow him to do it, because for whatever reason, our EPAs, they want to see 5 years worth of operation. Even a mass burn or the incinerator technologies we heard about yesterday, if the government of the day, 1920 whatever, when these things were built, said we want to see it running for 5 years, we wouldn't even have those today. Our EPAs, I'm sorry, I hope there's some here, because take it back and tell them I'm a bastard, but I think you're lazy. I do, because you don't want to do the work. You want the work to have been done in another state or another country or somewhere, and just come in and give it a little, here it is, here's my little. We have to do some of the work. Otherwise, how are we going to be an innovative country? We've got a Prime Minister who's talking about innovation, and yet when you try and do innovation with in this space, our EPAs go, ooh, no, you can't do that. We want to see 5 years somewhere else. Show us that it works. No, you set a criteria, you give us some targets, you tell us where we want to be, and we'll bloody well be there. But you're going to have to do a bit of work. And if you don't like that, get out the EPA and let somebody in there that should be in there to do the job properly. If we want innovation, then we have to change that thought process. And I hope there's a few here. And you can go back and tell your boss, I'm a bastard, I don't care. But you are lazy if you don't do this work. That got a bit off tangent, but it don't matter. Pillar 4. Those of you that know me, I am like that. Because I believe in that. Honest, I do. I believe in that. So, pillar 4, offtake and products and co-products. I'm going to say a little bit more about New South Wales, because it's a classic example. And I believe one of the reasons why EPAs are a little like what I've just talked about they are, is because of some of the AWTs that were built up in New South Wales. That's why I think New South Wales is really anal. Is because we build, as an industry, all these AWTs, and one of the co-products that we were going to sell as high quality compost never met the grade. So basically a lot of those AWTs, and there's some of you maybe in the audience that are going, you don't know anything about this, but that's okay. This is just my belief, and I'll put a disclaimer around it. It's my belief. All they're really doing in some cases is evaporating off the water, heating it up, and they're making high quality compost that can only be used in the landfill, mine rehabilitation. Right? And I believe the EPA are never ever going to get belted up again. They're never going to let that happen. So to some degree, okay, maybe they are a bit lazy, but maybe we created some of that ourselves in our past activities. But we have to be careful because we're not going to, does this work? Oh, yeah. Those co-products, they're never going to let us do that to them again. They are never going to let it happen. So we have to make sure, if we're going to go down the track of putting energy into the grid, that we have offtake agreements for our energy and they're long-term. A 5-year offtake agreement's not necessarily bankable. There's a business up in upstate New York, had a 20-year offtake agreement at 6 cents a kWh, and it was upside down. And after 20 years, that expired, and the new agreement they got with the offtaker was 3.5 cents. And at 6 cents, it was upside down. So at 3.5 cents, it's really in trouble. So we think we got a 20-year agreement. We think we got a 20-year deal. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be totally profitable. It was upside down as it was in the beginning because they didn't do their homework properly. They didn't make sure that they had all their offtakes. I'm seeing an American over there going, he's wrong. But that's okay. Maybe I am wrong, but they're still losing money. It still is upside down. And if you want to Google ash for trash in upstate New York, Onondaga County, you'll see them trying frantically to get a home for the 90,000 tonnes of ash that's coming out the bottom of their big mass burn incinerator that nobody wants. And I've actually been to the site and I've seen the site, and I've been to the little county that they're trying to dump it in. Because they didn't do their homework even 20 years ago to make sure they had this stuff right. They had an offtake, they had no offtake, they had an ash that they didn't work out was going to cost them a fortune to get rid of. And if we're going to go down this track, we're going to have some materials that are going to come out the bottom of this thing, the side of this thing, or up the top of this thing. We have to understand what those things look like and whether or not they're going to be a cost or a profit centre. And if we say, oh yeah, no, we'll get a home for those, that's not a problem to us. We'll get a home for that. Well, if you don't know what that home is, then don't build it. Because there's a fair chance you will not get a home for that. And that might be the bit that causes the whole thing to come crumbling down. The fifth pillar. And you'll notice that it's a short pillar. That's because it's not the full pillar. This is only the first bit of the pillar. This is our little pre-feasibility funding bit of the pillar. This is the bit that none of us can get. Nobody wants to fund the pre-feasibility. Nobody wants to put the money up to do that. The poor developer or the guy who's got the technology is expected to put that up. The guy or the business that wants to build that, they want all that feasibility work to have been done, stage 0, 1 and 2, and we'll talk about them shortly, by somebody but not the people that are putting up the money. It is a fascination to me that an equity investor is more than happy to put 50, 500 million, 200 million, whatever the number is, into a project, but won't spend $1 million or so making sure that what he's going to spend his 50, 100, 200 million dollars on works. It just is a fascination to me. Now, I'm going to put them in the same class as our EPA friends. They're just lazy. But maybe I'm wrong. So there's the rest of the pillar. And believe it or not, that, I believe, is the easiest money to get if you can get that. And I'm sure lots of you, I saw a few heads nodding, I'm sure lots of you have come across that, where you've had a great idea, but you haven't been able to get to the point where you could do an investment grade document that you can go to get your funding for. But if you can get that investment grade document and show your returns, then you can get that 5B funding. Good luck getting that. I've got notes here. So we have our 5 pillars, but they're undefined. We just have 5 pillars at this point in time. Or we think we have 5 pillars. We've gone and we've looked at some of this stuff. But there needs to be a staged approach to getting those 5 pillars and making sure they work, making sure they interact, making sure that each of those 5 pillars actually fit into a project that's going to be practical, technical, and feasibly able to be implemented and make money. Because let's be honest, if it does not make money, I don't care who you are, I don't care what local council you are and how the mayor toddled up and cut the ribbon and everybody got all warm and fuzzy because we're lovely and environmental and it's gorgeous. And that will last about the first bill. Right? After that, it gets awfully painful. And you might have a 20 or 30 year project. But you'll notice our little 5A funding sitting up here. This is what this is going to fund. So the first stage of any project it's not a lot more than a quick screen. Just to evaluate what we have. Just to say, is there a project here or isn't there a project here? Is there something worth investing this money into putting together? So it's a suspect prospect qualification. It's a little bit around conceptual design. It's a short process and it's just basically saying, do we have a project? Is this worth pursuing? Then we have our level 1 feasibility. I better go back to my notes, otherwise Mark will kill me if I miss out on any of this. It largely builds on, the reason we call it a 0 is because it really is, if you have a no-go, it's nothing. But if you have a go, then it becomes part of your stage 1. It's the basis of how you move forward into stage 1. It talks about your inputs. It looks at your outputs. It looks at whether or not you've produced a biochar or just a black shitty substance that nobody wants. It looks at your feedstock and whether or not you're able to get that right feedstock and whether or not the feedstock's going to come in at a price that is somewhere within what you're aiming to get. It looks at any outputs, it looks at some emissions, and it starts to look at what your technology needs to be looking like and what technology you're proposing to use and how it's going to all work together. You might go at the end of that, whoa, there's another no-go, we better stop here, better go back and reevaluate, have a little think about begin with the end in mind, or we might just go, we don't have a project because it just doesn't stack up. We're just not going to get enough gate fee, or we're not going to get enough stock, or we've got the wrong piece of real estate. We need to go and reevaluate whether our real estate is the right piece of real estate. This is where we start looking at our 5 pillars and seeing how they interact with each other and how they're going to work to make sure that we end up with a sustainable building or a sustainable project. Once we think, yeah, we're going to go through the next gate, we start looking at the financials. This is where we start to develop an investment grade document that we can take to market, or we can take to our boards, or we can take to the bank, or a combination of all of the above. This is where the rubber really hits the road, because like I said, just because it's an environmental project doesn't mean that for 30 years people are going to go, oh, I know we're losing money, but it's environmental. It's lovely. I'm saving 1 kilogram of carbon every day. We're happy to spend all that money to do that. That was Yorkshire, because we're tight bastards, we wouldn't do it. So our level 2 is where we build the actual financial model. So by this stage, we should have a project that is defined and is able to fund itself moving forward. So by the time we have undertaken those 3 stages, or stage 1 and 2 with a little bit of stage there on the front, we should be able to optimally determine and define what's going to be built while ensuring its practical, technical and economic feasibility. Let's never forget the economic feasibility. And you've spent your 5A funding, you then have something you can take to market. You have something you can go and see if you can get this project funded, whether it's by your board, like I said, whether it's by a bank or whether it's by an investment. But you should have an investment grade document that you can take to market. So we've gone from an undefined project to a defined project. Now again, I've been doing a little bit of work with a guy in the US, and they have some grants up in upstate New York. You can Google it, it's called NYSERDA. And they've just given all of these people $100,000. They've put out 83 prizes. They called them prizes. There were grants. You didn't have to match dollar for dollar. There was just $100,000, go and do it. And all these engineering firms went and helped all these local governments get these $100,000 grants. And by the end of November, they were going to come back to NYSERDA with projects. And every single one of those 83, as I understand it, has had to ask for an extension. And one of the reasons we believe they've had to ask for an extension is because they're trying to design something that hasn't as yet been defined. They don't know what they're defining. They don't know what they're engineering because they haven't done that work. They've just gone, oh yeah, this is great, there's 100 grand to be had. So they've gone out and taken the 100 grand and now they're scratching their heads and saying, well, what exactly are we going to build? What exactly are we supposed to be engineering? So we need to define the project first. We need to make sure we have our 5 pillars. And we need to make sure that it is a well-defined project. Stage 3, once you've done that work, by the time you've got here and you've done this properly and you've done this properly, you know what you've got here. Then you can start doing your detailed design and engineering because the engineers know what you want them to design. They know exactly. They only have to do it once because you've done this work. You're not continuously going back, oh, hang on. I know we've got 50 A70s or whatever they call themselves. I know we got a heap of those, but you're going to have to change it because all of a sudden we've worked out X, Y, Z. That needs to be done here, and then we can go into detailed design engineering. That's what this is about, funding this stuff here. It shouldn't be funding any more of this stuff here. This stuff should have been done by the time we get to this point here. Once we've designed it, we have to build it. We have to install it, and we have to make it work. It's pretty simple stuff from here on in. Whoops. And then we do our training, and we implement it. The other thing I'm going to say about let me go back, this funding here, it doesn't stop there, or it may not stop there. Sometimes we do all of that work and we get the project built and we think, right, we needed $1 million. We've spent $1,001,001, but we managed to claw the dollar from somewhere and we open the gate. And we expect all the little waste to come toddling through the gate. We expect to turn it on and we expect at the end of the first month to make a profit. And sometimes that just doesn't happen. I would say more than likely not. It takes you 12 months or more, 2 years, to make the profit that you've promised the guy who's giving you that, or the bank or the investment group or whatever, that we're going to do that. And they turn around and say, oh no, we've given you all the money we got. We're not giving you any more. But you need to have an operational cost. Again, If you do the work properly, you'll know exactly what this is, and you'll be able to project when the thing will start making money. Now, I know there's a little bit of science in that, and I know there's a little bit of love goes into that. But if you don't allow for that, there's a fair chance somebody will come and buy it off you cheap, and they'll be the ones that make the money. So this is about doing the job properly. And I put the slide up. When we do this stuff, there are no shortcuts. I don't believe there are any shortcuts. And if we think about some of the technologies that have gone pear-shaped in the past, they took shortcuts. I actually went to the opening of the SWERF. I went away and I sold my EDL shares because I went to the opening and I saw some stuff and I thought, this thing doesn't work. And they opened it, cut a ribbon, and it never worked, and it was gone within 6 or 8 months because they took some form of a shortcut. And I don't want to go into what that made me make my decision. But if we're going to make a shortcut, if we're going to say, nah, it should be right, we'll just do this, there's a potential we'll be destined to failure. And it's taken 13 years and we're still talking about SWERF. And if we have, in this space, any failures in 13 years, we'll still be having meetings like this, but we'll be talking about SWERF 26 years ago and X project 13 years ago, and we'll still be struggling. Because our community or our industry is risk averse, not just because of SWERF, but because we've heard of so many of these false startups where they didn't undertake this process first. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that you got something out of that, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you very much.